This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors and Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media accounts, my columns at 6035 Media, the other podcasts we've done, my photography website. You can be a supporter of this podcast at Patreon, patreon.com/hikingbob. And also there's a link there. You can email me with suggestions or sign up for my newsletter, which comes out once a week and it's free. And speaking of suggestions, today we have a frequent guest back on the podcast, Alicia Filley. And that was because of a listener wrote in and said, we haven't heard from Alicia in a while. And I'm thinking, we haven't. So let's have Alicia back on here, and here we are. So Alicia, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Bob, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be back and wish you and all of your listeners a happy new year. I'm so glad that they thought of me. I was thinking of you guys for this year too. So it's wonderful to reconnect.
And Alicia's known as the Healthy Hiker, and she's got a great newsletter that comes out periodically, I think a couple of times a week, I guess it is. That I see it, and all about how to be a healthy hiker, and a lot of stuff about knees, which if you're an old fart like me, your knees are always sore and stuff like that. But Alicia always has some great information because you are a physical therapist and you're an avid hiker, and I can't think of two better things to meld together that have somebody out there hiking also knows how to fix the things that ail you. So
that's right.
Or prevent things from ailing you, which you're also very good at. So thanks again for being on here. Tell us what you'd like to talk about today.
Well, one thing that I've really been thinking a lot about, because as you mentioned, I am a knee pain expert. I really understand the biomechanics of hiking, what's required beyond just you need to get strong. I understand the pathology of what happens when you have knee pain. I understand the phenomenon of pain, which is a biopsychosocial phenomenon. But one of the things that is an aspect of all of that I've really been given a lot of thought to is balance, because hikers come to me and they really complain of three major things. Number one is knee pain. Number two is fear of falling. And number three is fear of being left behind or making people wait on you. And one of the common threads through all of those things is lack of balance and stability. And I know this because one of the weirdest wins that my clients report after we've been working together for just a little while is that they can stand and put their pants on. They don't have to sit down and put their pants on. They don't have to lean against the bathroom counter or the closet wall and put their pants on. And it's just one of those totally off things that we never talk about, we never train for, we never practice. But as a byproduct of all of the work that we do together, they improve their balance. And that shows up in all of their hiking as well as some of their daily activities. And that's one of the ones that just blows their mind. They're like, I can stand in the middle of the room and put my pants on. So I've been thinking a whole lot more about what goes into balance, how it's much more than just what happens at your foot and ankle, what kind of core stability is required, all of that. So that's what I'm looking forward to talking with you about today.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if that's a strength thing, a confidence thing, what is it that makes you improve your balance? How was it that they regain their balance and are able to put their clothes on without having to lean against something, which there's some days that's a challenge.
I hear you. So there's so much that goes into balance, because what balance is being able to stay within your base of support. So your base of support is that area between your 2 feet where you are standing upright. And if you're only on 1 foot, that becomes a very narrow spot on the ground. So being able to stay within that base of support is what is so important and what keeps us upright. And as we age, we become more prone to falling, which then becomes a mortality and morbidity risk as we age. Falling is one of the most detrimental things that can happen to an older person. So that skill naturally decreases as we age. And one of the reasons is because we lack the balance reactions that we have as children. So there are these receptors in our ankles, in our ears, in all of our body that sense when we start to get outside of that base of support. And when we do, the body then reacts, just very subconsciously reacts to correct itself, to bring itself back into that base of support, because your brain doesn't want to fall. It wants to keep you upright. That's what it's programmed to do. So there's that neurological component and those balance reactions. And then there's also having the strength to be able to do that, to be able to pull yourself back. But when you think about kids, and think back to when you were a kid, and when I was a kid, when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, we practiced our balance all the time, right? We would walk along a curb, we would hop from thing to thing, we would jump over rocks, we would jump over cracks in the sidewalk, we would play hopscotch. So many ways that we would move and practice our balance, and we didn't move in an only linear fashion. And that's the other thing I found with my clients is as we age, we move back and forth, right? We just move in straight lines and we don't rotate as much as we used to. When you're kids, you're throwing balls, you're playing sports, you're turning, you're doing all of these kinds of things. And we just start to get into this really linear existence. And so when our base of support is challenged by a rotation, by a rock, by stepping over a root, something like that, we just don't have the practice and we don't have the strength to right ourselves. And that makes us feel insecure. And when we feel insecure and lack confidence, we slow down, we're more careful. And sometimes that actually inhibits our body's natural reactions, and then we're more prone to falling. So it's a very kind of complex thing, but there's some really simple things we can do to help correct it.
Okay, that makes sense. And I still, you talk about some of the things we used to do as a kid. I know when I'm walking Cole in the neighborhood, I'll sometimes walk on a curb just to, of course, now I'm at his whim, so he may yank me off the curb or something like that. But I'll try walking on a curb just to see how my balance is. And I make jokes about how old I am and stuff like that. But I think I do fairly well. Because, in Colorado especially, rocky terrain, you've got to have a decent sense of balance to do that stuff, or you limit yourself to easy trails, which is fine if that's what you're happy with. But I'm wondering if the use of hiking poles, which are a fine thing to have, and I have a pair, but I wonder if they also work against keeping your sense of balance, because now you're relying on those to hold you up. Does that make a difference? Should you try hiking with them less often so that you maintain your balance and don't rely on something external?
Well, I'm a big fan of hiking poles. Mm-hmm. I think everyone should have them. Everyone should use them, because what hiking poles do is they now increase your base of support, because now instead of just 2 legs, you've got 4 legs. I'm putting air quotes around that. So now instead of just the area between your 2 feet, you've got this whole area between your 2 feet and where the poles are that is your base of support, and that gives you more wiggle room, as it were. So I think hiking poles on the trail are absolutely a good idea all the time for everybody, because the trail is not the place you want to practice your balance.
Okay.
Right? That's unless it's a very safe situation and you know what you're doing. Like I would prefer that people practice their balance somewhere else, and then they will naturally rely on their poles less when they feel more confident and more stable, and their balance is better.
Okay. And
it's a great question.
I like to tell people that when at my age, I don't when I fall, I don't bounce anymore. I just go thud. So it's being able to keep a sense of balance. Like you said, as you get older, is obviously more important. And having been an EMT for many, many, many years, I think Socrates taught my first class. You have to you treat a lot of people who fall and older people who get injured, and a lot of times there's just not much anybody can do about why they fell. But I'm wonder about having lost their sense of balance, and that's why they fall, or being overconfident. And, sometimes you have to recognize as you get older, some things just don't work as well as they used to. So I guess what you're going to tell me next is how do we work on our balance?
Yeah, so you hit a great point that that thought that, well, as you get older things just don't work as well as they used to. And a lot of people will just have that thought like, well, this is just how it is to get older. But you can improve your balance. You can improve your stability because my clients are doing it. They're going from, having to sit down and put their pants on to standing in the middle of the closet, putting their pants on one leg and doing it just fine. So, and they're astounded. So I always challenge people's thoughts about what happens as they age and what your body has the ability to regain and recover with just some practice. So some of the things that you want to look at when you're looking at wanting to improve your balance is improving your core stability. And by core, we've probably talked about this before, but I don't just mean, the sexy ab muscles. I mean, the entire corset around your trunk, as well as your hip and shoulder girdle. Like all of that is really just your center of mass. And that's where you should generate your where you move from. And that should be where you gain your stability. So a lot of core work is important. Now, when I say a lot of core work, here's one thing about the core is that you can make great gains doing short workouts frequently. So I have my clients working on their core maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes tops, or we do a few core exercises within a workout. But it's not, the concept of 100 sit-ups is great if you want to be in a magazine photo shoot. It's just not a terribly functional way to train your core. And it doesn't address your back muscles, your extensor muscles, what we call the posterior chain, your glutes, your upper back muscle, everything that holds you upright against gravity on the back. So working on your core is really important. And then strengthening in your legs, especially the muscles around the pelvic girdle and the hips is very important. And then balance drills. Those are really the three components that I find. And within all of those, then is incorporating some rotational movement. So making sure that you are comfortable, rotating around and turning and feeling confident doing those kinds of things.
I do a workout several times a week with a kettlebell, or a couple of kettlebells, that is designed to be a core workout. And it kind of, I guess without realizing it, maybe that's why my balance is still not so bad, because it incorporates a lot of the stuff. It incorporates rotational stuff and everything I do. And I love kettlebells. I think they're just a great tool to use. Everything you do with that, if you do it right, you're also tightening up the core as you're doing it. Even if you're doing curls or whatever, everything is part of that. So it's kind of interesting to know that the rotational stuff, especially. Do you use like weight in your core workout, or using like little dumbbells or kettlebells or something like that?
Yeah, you certainly can. And I'm a big fan of kettlebells too. Not a lot of people have access to them, but the great thing about kettlebells is that they are an offset weight. So if you look at a dumbbell, it's got a weight on either end and it's balanced. But a kettlebell is offset. It's got a weight on one end and it's off center. So it's going to feel heavier than it actually is because it creates a longer lever arm when you're holding it because the weight's at the very end. And because of that, then it automatically whatever you're doing with a kettlebell automatically challenges your balance because it's pulling you off center, off of your center of gravity. So I love kettlebell work for that. Exactly. And dumbbells are great too. You can use dumbbells for strengthening as well. One way to sort of create that effect, that same effect with a dumbbell is to hold it in what we call a goblet position, where you're really just holding one end of the dumbbell. And so that sort of creates a pseudo kettlebell for you. So if somebody has a set of dumbbells and wants to try some kettlebell type exercises, they can do it that way. Resistance bands are also great. I mean, you can do a lot of good work with resistance bands. For a lot of people, those are more practical. Ever since the pandemic, and everybody started buying up things for their home gym, weights have used to be $1 a pound, and now they're more than that. So, it's sometimes it's a little cost prohibitive to get some of the heavier weights for people. But you can do work with resistance bands too, and get a really effective, great workout.
I was shopping for kettlebells during the pandemic, and I think at one point I decided it would have been cheaper for me to just melt the steel myself and make one than to try and buy one. If you could even find them, they were expensive. I'm hoping as other things have happened, as the pandemic is past us, that things start to get a little more reasonable. Supply goes up a little bit. But I know exactly what you're talking about. So when you do your balance thing with your clients, so you are incorporating some weight training or some core training in there. What other things can people do to help improve their balance? You mentioned some things you don't want to do on a trail. So say you're walking around
Right.
your neighborhood, what can you do to help your balance?
Right. So, channel your inner 8-year-old and walk on a curb, hop over things. Those are all great balance activities that you can try. But even just in your home, walking down a hallway, walking heel to toe forward and then heel to toe backward, walking on your heels, just with your toes up, just walking on your heels, that adds a different dimension. You can walk on your toes, tiptoe walking. That's another thing to do to practice balance. And even what I call a roll through walking. So where you strike on your heel and roll up to your toes and kind of do a little bit of a calf raise. And then on the other foot, strike on your heel and roll through onto your toes. So you're kind of doing this up and down sort of walking that looks a little bit silly, but it definitely will challenge your balance. And then even there's some simple things like when you're waiting for the microwave to heat up your cup of coffee, stand on one leg, and try and balance on one leg. That's just a simple thing that you can do when you're waiting or when you're talking on the phone, or even if you're in line at the grocery store. You don't have to stand like a pelican or a stork, but you could just practice that weight shift, lift one foot up, and see how your balance is when you're carrying your groceries. So do what's called a suitcase carry, where you're carrying things in just one hand, something that's quite heavy on the end of a handle. So I recommend, for some of it's just your purse or your computer bag that can get really quite heavy, but you can always get a tote bag and load it up with some books or some bags of rice and beans, or a couple of 2-liter gallon bottles or soda bottles or something like that, just something to make it heavy and carry it on one side, as if you were carrying a suitcase back in the day when we all had to carry our suitcases. And it's called a suitcase carry. What that does is it throws you off balance, and you have to work to stay within your base of support instead of leaning into that weight. So those are just some simple drills that you can do. When you're at home or walking around, and always be challenging your balance.
Or even just carry if your backpack's not huge, just carry your backpack around with you with the stuff you have in it. I'm thinking two things when you were talking about the walk and stuff like that was one, Monty Python silly walks routine.
Yeah.
And then some people probably get experience doing heel to toe if they get stopped for a DUI check. But I'm hoping that's not. This is practice for. Don't let this be practice for your DUI. Don't do that. But I was just thinking, I spent too much time in law enforcement. I remember all that stuff. So yeah, those are all, and they're all really simple things. And the thing you said about the bag, like carrying a suitcase, that's like a kettlebell that throws your weight off a little bit. So it's kind of like having a kettlebell kind of a thing. And I'm thinking the heavy weight I have is like my camera bag. If I carry that on one side, that's a lot of work. And one of the kettlebell routines I do is holding it on one side and kind of like dipping to one side and pulling back up, kind of and then you do both sides, that kind of works the side muscles a little bit. So that's
Yes.
kind of, again, going back to what you're saying about carrying something in one hand like that. And this
Yes.
is all
Yes.
pretty easy stuff to do. It's stuff that's not hard to do, and you really don't need to buy kettlebells or anything. Like you said, a bag with a couple, gallons of water in it or something, gallon jugs or something like that. We'll do the same thing. Pretty easy stuff. And I'm even thinking with gallon jugs of water or milk or something, they've got a handle in it. You're already there with that off balance, off center kind of thing there. So
Yeah.
um,
I'm a big fan of laundry detergent too, because that's heavy and you can get
right.
those in some really big plastic jugs. And when they're heavy to carry around when they're full. And so when you're done with the detergent, you can replace it with water. You could put a little sand in it, to vary the poundage. So real creative, easy way you can find something to help you with these activities at home that you already have.
Okay. So as people are doing this and they're practicing at home and stuff, they go out on the trails. What else can they what can they do while they're on the trails to help improve their balance? I mean, obviously, if your balance a little iffy, you probably don't want to practice too much on the trail. You want to practice where it's safer. But say you're on the trail, what can you do to improve your balance?
So one thing I think that's really important is your visual input. That's while your ears are where your balance centers are, you've got these little um, crystals in your ears that, and crystal is not the right word. It's not an actual crystal, but that's what they're called. And they kind of tell you where you are in space, like your own inner gyroscope. Um, so that's really important. But your visual input is equally important. So making sure that you're scanning the trail, that you're looking for objects that you might um, trip over or need to work around. And so it's easy to get distracted, by plants and wildlife and beauty all around you. But I one of the things that I do is just do a visual sweep of the trail in front of me, and not that way you're not fixated on a certain point and you've got your head down on, looking down all the time, but just doing a visual sweep, just looking from side to side on the trail. And you're just looking for things that your brain's going to go, oh, watch out for that, look for that kind of a thing. So I think that's really important. And that brings up another aspect of balance, which you can practice off of the trail. And that is by playing with your visual input. So when you feel quite proficient, say, in walking heel to toe down your hallway, then if you have a wall close by that you can reach out to touch, then you can try closing your eyes and walking heel to toe. You can try closing your eyes and standing on one foot. That when you take away your visual input, then you realize like, oh, okay, now where am I? Where's my body? And it is a whole nother dimension. It makes you rely on a completely different sensory input to maintain your balance. So that's the way to add a little certain difficulty to your balance training.
So that thing you talked about doing with, your eyes closed and just reaching out to see if you can touch a wall or if you can, that's actually a pretty cool thing. Spatial disorientation, I guess they call it. That's actually a pretty simple thing to do. And, I would probably do it like next to my bed so I had something soft to fall on or something like that. I guess we should talk about maybe how people can recognize that they may have a balance issue. When I was a kid, I had a lot of inner ear infections, and as you mentioned, your ears are your balance points and keep you upright. And if you have an ear infection, one of the symptoms of that is you're dizzy or you can't stand upright. You lose your balance. How can people know that they maybe need to work on it, other than maybe they just feel like they need to work on it?
Right. Yeah. They may not even realize that their balance has gotten worse until it starts to get better. And then they realize, oh, like my clients, like, oh, I didn't even realize it was such a natural progression for me to go from standing in the closet to put my pants on to taking them to the bed to sit down to put them on, that I just didn't even realize I was doing it. So, rather than no, unless it's apparent, unless you have fallen, I know that my mom had had a couple of falls, and she came to me and said, "Hey, I'm falling. I feel like I'm weak or something's going on. Can you help me?" So we got her doing some workouts, and she just got a lot more stable. So unless that's happened to you, you might not even realize that maybe your balance is a little off or could be improved. But there are a couple of things that I call them sort of diagnostic exercises that I find that people who have decreased balance have trouble with these exercises. And it's really not what you would think, because these are mostly core exercises. So one of them is called the dead bug, and it's when you're lying on your back and you've got your arms straight up in front of your chest, extended out, and your hips are flexed to 90 degrees and your knees are flexed to 90 degrees, what is sometimes called a tabletop position. Now, from this position, you move your left arm, extend it back over your head at the same time that you're moving your right leg and extending it out. So left arm, right leg are extended, and right arm, left leg are still in the flexed bent position. So then you alternate those two. And when you take that, if you have trouble in that position, then it's telling me that you're lacking the stability of your base of support when your extremities are outside of that area. So when you're lying, let me see if I can explain this a little better. When you're lying on your back on the ground, your arms and shoulders are flexed up, then your legs and arms are flexed up, then your base of support is really just your back from the top of your head to the bottom of your pelvis, right? That's the part of you that's on the floor. That's your base of support. Now you want to keep that in control. That means pressing your belly button to the ground and keeping it in that position. And then as you start to move your arms and legs, if you have trouble keeping your core stable and have trouble keeping your back from overextending, then you now have gone outside of that base of support and challenged it, and it's difficult to maintain that position. If you take that dead bug position, which is you lying on your back, and you just flip it upright, then that's really the position of you as a hiker stepping up onto, say, a rock or an incline, because you've got your left leg bent up to take the step. You've got your right arm flexed forward to extend your pole, and then the other opposite limbs are doing the opposite thing. So we want to really see, what does that control look like when you're lying on the ground? And that if you have difficulty with that, that tells me that you may not be so stable when you are upright. The second one is the swimmer. So that's when you're lying on your stomach, and can you extend your arms and legs and opposite, just same thing, opposite reciprocally as if you were swimming, extending them back. So I don't know if that makes much sense, but you can Google these or look at my website. I've got these exercises on my blog. A lot of people have trouble with that. And what that tells me is that the back muscles, the extensors in the shoulders and the extensors in the hips are weaker than they should be, and that might contribute to lack of balance.
I think the back thing I'm going to do next time I fall, I'm going to tell people, no, I'm working on my balance.
There you go.
While I'm here, let me work on. No, it's actually a great idea.
Yeah, well, let's just keep you from falling in the first place. So
Yeah.
then you won't have any explaining to do.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Another one is called the walkout. And so it's if you're standing and you bend down to the ground and you basically walk on your hands out to a plank position and then walk back and return to standing, walk with your hands back towards your feet and return to standing. A lot of times people will have difficulty with that. And that tells me that there's a lack of stability somewhere in the core as you move your arms and legs reciprocally, keeping yourself stable in that position.
Okay. That's really good advice. I think we don't think about that. Our balance a lot. Do you find that people who have better balance are relying on their hiking poles more as they probably should be for weight distribution as opposed to keeping themselves steady?
Well, hiking poles really should not be relied on for anything other than a touch point and balance. So if you find that you're really leaning on your hiking poles a lot, if you're white knuckling the poles, if you're having symptoms of carpal tunnel syndrome, your hands go numb, you have pain in your shoulders when you're hiking, all of that tells me that you're leaning far too much and relying far too much on your hiking poles. So while I think they're a great idea, if that's what you're using them for, then you need to start working on creating more stability in your body and just using your hiking poles for balancing.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's good. So that's a good indication. I know I've talked to people who said I want to use hiking poles, but they hurt a lot when I'm using them. So it's possible that it's a substitute for something else, and it shouldn't be. If I'm understanding what you're saying correctly.
It could be that, or it could be that they just don't have them adjusted correctly.
Yeah, I do see that where people have them set up too high or too low, or they're leaning into them, or their arm is, their arm is too far up or something. I have seen that too, and I try to help people with that, but mixed results.
Right.
But that's okay.
And the thing about hiking poles too is it's not just to set it and forget it. Like you really have to change them, the length of them, depending on the terrain that you're on. So if you are going uphill, they should be shorter than that 90-degree angle at your elbow. You should have a wider angle at your elbow, because as you reach forward, and on elevation, the ground is going to be higher each time you reach forward. And the opposite is true when you go down. So I'm sure we've talked about this before, but just to reiterate, when you're going down, your hiking poles should be longer. So if you're standing with your hiking poles, you should have a less than 45-degree angle at your elbow, because as you reach down, the ground is further away, right? And
again, that throws you off balance too if you're leaning into them.
Yes,
as opposed to having them extended. So we've circled back around to balance again.
Exactly. And that's the other place where I find people really have a lot of fear of going down, because they may have their hiking poles extended, adjusted incorrectly, and then they're leaning forward. And then when you're leaning forward out of your base of support, you feel more like you're falling. So then they're more afraid of falling. Like it's definitely it's all connected.
Your head's a big, heavy thing on top of your body, so that's going to throw you off. It's why kids fall so much, because their head is proportionally larger when they're small, and throws their balance off a little bit. The same thing can happen to people.
Right, especially if you have a backpack on, right? Whether it's a day pack or an actual backpack, it doesn't matter. You don't typically walk around with a weight back there, and so when you're leaning forward and you have that additional weight on the back of you, that's going to then fall into gravity. Gotcha. That also can contribute to the feeling that you're going to fall. That is, again, why those swimmers are so important. Why that posterior chain, all the muscles along the back are so important, so that you can offset that force of gravity pulling you downward with your muscle action and stay extended upright.
The swimmer sounds kind of like the Superman pose in yoga. Yes. It's similar to that, except you're actually doing some motion.
Correct.
With it, as opposed to just getting in that pose where your arms and legs are back up.
Exactly.
Well, Alicia, I know you're pressed for time, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Any last words of advice that you have for us?
Yeah, just keep at it, right? So hiking is wonderful. It's amazing. It's so fun. And there's so many things you can do when you're not on the trail to help you feel better, feel more confident when you are on the trail. So I'm just a big fan of, a lot of us use hiking as a form of exercise, which is incredible, but also just what can you be doing when you're not on the trail on those rainy days, cold days, super hot days, muddy, buggy days. Like there's lots of days we're not on the trail, and what can you be doing to help yourself feel better? If your listeners are looking for something like that, I have put together a little Better Balance in 30 Days program that is available to them. It's on my website. You can access it. It's thehealthyhiker.com/balance. And there'll be a link to take you to the portal. It's $24 for a 30-day workout plan.
Awesome. And you also have links to your social media and stuff, all that on your website, correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
And a newsletter you can subscribe to, which is very valuable and always has good information on there. So I highly suggest go to thehealthyhiker.com, subscribe to the newsletter, check out Alicia's programs because they are tremendous help. I've talked to people who are in your line of work, physical therapy, but they may not be hikers. So a lot of times it's kind of generic physical therapy, I guess, if that makes sense. So it's really good to have you out there who does this as a hobby a lot and is a physical therapist, because you can identify where things are not going right or things people do wrong and come like you did today and give us some really great tips and everything. So I really appreciate you being on here and appreciate the listeners for going, hey, we haven't heard from her in a while. Bring her back on the show. So I really appreciate that you spent some time with us today.
Bob, it is, excuse me, it's always a pleasure. I love talking with you and sharing information with your listeners. I know you have such an active hiking community that follows you, and I just am happy to share anything I can do to help people be more active, feel more confident, and get out on the trail.
All right, everybody. Well, that's Alicia Filley, the Healthy Hiker at thehealthyhiker.com. Alicia, again, thank you so much for being on the show. And I want to thank everybody for listening to the Outdoors Hike About podcast.
My pleasure. Take care.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.